1871. Then we have the scroll of Seminus, which contains several chapters of the Book of the Dead, as well as some unidentified text. Seminus was the daughter of a wealthy Egyptian, and she was apparently of priestly lineage. While several fragments of her scroll survived, much of it was also lost, presumably in the 1871 fire. We have the scroll of Nufianub, which contained a vignette or summary of one chapter of the Book of the Dead and several other unidentified texts. Nufianub was a wealthy Egyptian of Thebes, and the only place her name is attested is in Joseph Smith Papyrus number 3. Only one fragment of this survived, and again the rest probably destroyed in the fire. Then we have the scroll of Menephis, which contained chapter 45 of the Book of the Dead and other unidentified texts. Menephis was the son of Tanub, who was an Egyptian priest in Thebes. No fragments of the scroll survived, and it is presumed they were also destroyed in the fire. Then we have the Hydrocephalus of Shishonk, which is the source for facsimile 2. The only thing we know about Shishonk is that he was a wealthy member of an Egyptian priestly family. And it's uncertain whether this Hydrocephalus was destroyed in the fire. We don't really know what happened there. When were the papyri written? Well, there's two issues. We have the date of the text and the date of the papyri. The date of the text is when the author wrote the text. Such texts are often copied in different languages. For instance, the Gospel of Matthew was written in the 1st century AD, but the earliest Matthean manuscript that we have is a copy written in the 3rd century AD by a copyist. So the text was written earlier than the document. Now, most Latter-day Saints believe that the text was written by Abraham. Then we have the date of the papyri, which is a separate issue. Many Latter-day Saints believe that the papyri date to Abraham's time, but scholars date it usually either to the late or to the Roman period between the 1st century and 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, or to the Ptolemaic period, which is about the first half of the 2nd century BC or the 3rd century BC.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to go through the rest of this fairly quickly. Again, this presentation will be on our website, so don't feel too bad. We have a lot of bibliographical notes at the end here. The second stage in the intellectual history begins with the recovery in 1967 of the Metropolitan Museum fragments. In the summer of 1968 issue of Dialogue, there's a whole bunch of articles on this topic. And one is an article pointing out that in these manuscripts of the Book of Abraham, the Egyptian symbols in the margin come from the Sensen text. And also kind of pointing out the way the Sensen text would have been organized, as we described before. Then there were several articles by noted Egyptologists of the time, Richard Parker, John Wilson, and Klaus Bayer, who translate the Sensen text, and it was an Egyptian book of breathings. Didn't appear to have anything to do with the Book of Abraham. I give this site to Charles Larson as, if you want to read the critical arguments about the Book of Abraham, this is one place where it's kind of all together, and one place you can read it. It's available on the internet. There's the site. But if you write to Luke Wilson and tell him you're a Mormon, he'll probably send you in for free. And that way you'll get all the pictures. So Luke Wilson, it's published by the Institute of Religious Research in Michigan, and Luke Wilson is the muckety-muck there. Now, in this early period, after the recovery of the papyri, the Book of Abraham studies from the faithful side is kind of dominated by Hugh Nibley. And he took a sabbatical year and came back to the University of Chicago and studied with Klaus Bayer and John Wilson. We already mentioned his 2-year serial in the Improvement era. a whole raft of articles in BYU Studies, at least a half a dozen. In 1976, he published his own translation of the Book of Breathings in a book called The Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, an Egyptian endowment. And we put up here a copy of kind of his methodology of illustrating this. The top line is an actual photograph of a line of text from the papyrus. And then underneath it, he has transcribed the hieratic script into hieroglyphic. And then he took a tracing table and he flipped it so as to read from left to right instead of right to left. And if you look at the symbols, you can see they're the same symbols, they're just going in a different direction. Then immediately under that, he gives a transliteration into Roman characters. And then there are textual notes at the bottom. And then elsewhere, he gives a smooth English translation. So I bought this book on my mission. I didn't even know what it was, but I flipped through it and I thought, wow, this looks interesting. So I bought it and I actually read it. I'm one of the 12 people in the church that have actually read this book. He followed that up with Abraham in Egypt, originally in 1981, reissued recently by Farms. And his final work, One Eternal Round, is in preparation by Farms. I understand that when the farm staff went to pick it up at his house, there were stacks of paper all over his bedroom and living room, and so they had to treat it like an archaeological dig. And they had to this is from level C, and so there's probably a big vault somewhere on BYU that has all his manuscripts. So how they'll ever sort through all that, I don't know. But I understand they're making good progress. Now, kind of in the footsteps of Nibley, there's kind of a younger generation, scholars that are interested in the problem but also have Egyptological training. I'm just going to mention some of the key figures and key publications. Ed Ashman's article on the restoration of the facsimiles for publication in Sunstone is probably his most important contribution. There's an article by Stephen Thompson that's kind of an update of Spalding, saying what modern Egyptology makes of the facsimiles. A little book by John Gee called A Guide to the Joseph Smith Papyri. Again, later there will be a bigger book, but for right now, this is enough to get you started. Absolutely essential to anyone who's interested in Book of Abraham studies. A well-constructed little book. Michael Rhodes published a translation and commentary on Facsimile 2, or remember, we call that the Hypocephalus of BYU Studies. And he keeps updating it and puts it on his website. So it's on his website. You can go there and read it, print it off. And this is a model for Book of Abraham studies. So it's a great article. There have also, over the years, since that first generation of Parker, Bayer, and Wilson, there have been other non-LDS Egyptologists who don't really understand the Mormon side of things, but who are interested in these documents as Egyptian documents. And I've listed some of those here. Translations of the Sensen Papyrus. Putting D.J. Nelson off to the side, there have been, first of all, Klaus Bayer in Dialogue in 1968, Nibley's, which we already mentioned. Now these two are actually translations of Louvre Papyrus 3284, which is a longer version. For an actual, the Joseph Smith Book of Breathings, there's one by Robert Rittner, published in Dialogue and republished in the Journal of Studies, and one by Michael Rhodes, the Hoare Book of Breathings, published by Farms.